What's up, everybody? Let's Talk Jets Radio. Just got to Florham Park. Fans are starting to line up already, so I'll do a video after training camp today. But I wanted to share a few more thoughts on the Haason Reddick situation now that I had a little bit to digest all the information that came out yesterday and, the live stream, hearing some fans and everything. And for me, this is kind of like three parts. Who's to blame? Who has the leverage? And how does it ultimately end? And the blame game, I'll admit that I continue to waffle on this. When the holdout first started, I was all over Reddick about it because I did believe what was out there, that the Jets probably had some kind of handshake deal that he was going to be there for minicamp in the building as they negotiated a contract. I know Connor Hughes keeps putting that tweet out that they would work on this year while he was here during training camp. And then as the season progressed, if he was playing well, they'd be open to talking about a long-term extension. So I was kind of on the side that no way Joe Douglas would possibly pull off this deal without some kind of assurance that the player was going to be here. I still kind of believe that there was something that must have been said that made Joe Douglas feel comfortable to execute that trade, whether it was the agent saying, yes, we'll be there, whatever it might have been. And Reddick himself, even in his press conference, made it sound like, and again, you could say words mean nothing, but he made it sound like he was fine playing out his contract, that he was happy to be here, he was going to be here, he was going to show up, and he ultimately chose the path that he did. So the blame game now, as we get a little bit more recent, and you hear all the reports that he turned down the contract before the trade was made, the Jets haven't offered another trade apparently since March, or I'm sorry, not another contract since March. So now you start hearing all this stuff, and for me, at least, the blame starts to shift a little bit more towards the Jets because the red flag was obviously there. This wasn't going to be something that was going to be easily figured out, so why not get it done before the trade became official? We see Brandon Ayuk right now, and this is also where you can maybe blame Reddick also. Brandon Ayuk, he's turned down, 2 trades already? Talked contract with the teams that the Niners were talking to. So why wasn't Reddick more adamant that, no, I'm not accepting a trade anywhere until my contract situation is figured out? So I'm kind of 50-50 right now as far as the blame game goes. The leverage, I do feel, is all in the Jets' corner. And shout out, I believe it was Dan Moscow who commented that, yeah, Reddick cannot be a free agent if he sits out this year, which I read after the stream last night. I didn't realize that. But the same kind of point that I was making, I think, still applies, that if he does sit out, Jets would obviously have his rights next year, but he wouldn't be a Jet. They would still be looking to trade him ultimately. So if they do execute a trade, he would still be talking to another team to get a new contract, coming off of a year where he didn't play, where he'd be turning 31. So I think from that perspective, if we're talking about Reddick getting a long-term deal, if he chooses to sit out this year, or if he just shows up, on the last day of training camp and doesn't play well this season, that's going to cost him millions, much more than he's already racked up in fines. So, yes, Joe Douglas and Saleh, their jobs are clearly on the line. I'm not going to dispute that. But I think Reddick, being a little bit older now, about to turn 30 this year, I don't think he can afford to sit out a full season. So I credit the Jets for kind of digging their heels in. I do think they have the leverage in this situation in spite of the fact that it's a win-now season. But how does it end now? And I hate to say it, but the fact that it's gone on this long, the trade request happened, the Jets clearly don't feel a need to budge. They're not going to release him. They're not going to trade him. So how does this ultimately end? And I kind of agree with Tyson last night that at some point, probably in the next 2 weeks, once training camp's about to close, he's going to show up. He'll collect his paycheck, but are you going to have a motivated Haason Reddick? And does it become a distraction if he's in the locker room just half-assing it, collecting his check, so that he doesn't continue to rack up more fines? So I don't know how the situation's ultimately going to end, but I do feel like he will show up. I don't think he's going to get traded. I don't think he's going to get cut. I believe the Jets on that. And I do give the Jets some credit for refusing to negotiate anything until he's in the building. I stand with the Jets on that. This is a new player that, in spite of what he's done in his career, he hasn't done it in a Jets uniform yet. And I think he started the relationship off on a very bad note by choosing not to show up to minicamp. Him making that decision, I think, set all of this in motion. If he showed up for minicamp, I think negotiations probably go a little bit different. Because based on what we're hearing now, the Jets have not sent him a new contract offer since March. So if he was in the building for training camp, you would think those discussions would be happening. So I do credit the Jets a little bit for refusing to negotiate while he's holding out, while he's not here. But where does it end then? Like, he has to ultimately show up for the Jets to be willing to talk. And if he's not going to show up, who's going to ultimately make the first move? Who's going to blink first to get this situation figured out? So I still blame the Jets for the red flags that were there and choosing to ignore it. But, and even going a step further, like I mentioned last night, with the Huff situation, the impact of the McDonald pick, I think all of those things led to the situation that we have now, where you take a guy 14th overall, he's entering year 2, you should expect that player to be an every down player. And I think Douglas felt the need to kind of justify that pick. And that's why I think they went, instead of going with Huff for 3 years, $51 million, they went with the stopgap in Reddick, who you could also possibly say is more of an every down player and helps the Jets, who are in that win now mode. But I just don't know how this thing ends. There's bad blood already. I've never seen a situation where a player who's unhappy with his contract gets traded, does a press conference, doesn't put on the uniform, and is asking for another trade already. Like, this shit is ridiculous. So, I do give the Jets some credit for digging their heels in here. But ultimately, like, you want to win this season, and Reddick is a game changer on that defensive line. I would hope that the Jets can find a way to get something done for this season. But that's predicated on Reddick showing up. He has to walk in that building and at least show up if he wants to get that contract that he wants, at least for this year. I don't see a long-term deal happening. I don't think that was ever the plan when they made this trade. I do think they want to give McDonald some time to see if he could develop. Douglas has to justify that pick, which I think is still wrong. But we never should have been in this situation to begin with. Huff was getting better every year. We all wanted him signed 2 years ago. They didn't do it. And now here we are. So it's a shitty, shitty situation. I don't know how it's going to end. But I don't think Reddick's getting traded. I don't think he's getting cut. But it is just frustrating as hell that we got all this excitement around this team, and we're talking about Haason Reddick not showing up. So hope you guys enjoyed the quick video here. I'll be at camp all day, so video coming soon later. Talk to you guys soon.